No one knew the 12-year-old sitting in seat 14A was a pilot. She looked like every other kid on that plane. Small backpack under the seat. A little navy blue model airplane in her jacket pocket, worn smooth from being handled so many times. A library book open on her lap. Feet that did not quite reach the floor. And then, at 34,000 feet above Colorado, the captain collapsed. And the girl in 14A walked to the cockpit and talked to two F-18 fighter jets like she had been doing it her whole life. Because she had. Before you watch the full story, comment below from which country are you watching. And please subscribe for more stories like this one. It was a Thursday in March. The flight was Delta Airlines Flight 2219, departing Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport at 9:14 in the morning, bound for Denver International Airport, scheduled arrival 11:08 local time. The aircraft was a Boeing 737-800, fully loaded, 148 passengers and 6 crew members. The weather across the route was clean and clear, one of those rare winter mornings when the sky over the mountain states is so blue it almost looks painted. The girl in seat 14A was named Zara Mitchell. She was 12 years old. She had light brown skin and dark, short-cut hair and a small scar above her left eyebrow from falling off a bicycle when she was 7. She was wearing a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and white sneakers. Around her neck was a yellow unaccompanied minor lanyard, bright and official, with her name and destination printed on a card in clear black letters. She was flying alone from Atlanta, where she lived with her mother, to Denver, where her father lived. She did this 4 times a year. She was used to flying alone. The flight attendant who had checked her in at the gate, a tall woman named Rosa, had walked her to her seat and smiled and said, "You okay, honey? You've done this before?" And Zara had said yes, thank you, she was fine, she had done this many times. And Rosa had smiled again and moved on, because there was nothing about Zara Mitchell that suggested anything other than what she appeared to be. A quiet, polite 12-year-old girl, traveling alone, probably a little bored, probably going to read her book and sleep for most of the flight. The library book was about ocean currents. Zara had read it twice already. But she read it again because there was something she wanted to understand better about the way warm water moved against cold water at great depth, and she liked reading things more than once until she understood them completely. This was a habit her father had given her. He called it the second pass. He told her that most people give up understanding something after the first pass, when things are still confusing, and that the second pass was where understanding actually lived. In her jacket pocket, pressed against her left side, was a small model F-18 Super Hornet, approximately 5 inches long, painted navy gray with the correct markings for Carrier Air Wing 8. It had been her father's. He had kept it on the dashboard of his car for years, and when Zara was 9 he had handed it to her one afternoon without saying much about it, and she had kept it in her jacket pocket every day since. She had a habit of reaching into her pocket and touching it with her fingers when she was thinking. She was doing that now, reading about deep ocean currents and touching the small airplane without knowing she was doing it. Nobody on that flight knew anything unusual about Zara Mitchell. Nobody knew that the quiet girl with the library book had a Federal Aviation Administration student pilot certificate issued under a special educational exemption program that had been granted to fewer than 8 people in the history of American aviation. Nobody knew she had 650 hours of simulator time, primarily on Boeing 737 and military aircraft configurations. Nobody knew she had 89 actual flight hours in real aircraft, logged carefully in a logbook that her father checked and signed after every single session. And nobody knew that her father, Commander James Mitchell, retired United States Navy, was one of the most decorated F-18 pilots his wing had ever produced, and that he had been teaching his daughter to fly since she was 5 years old with the same seriousness and precision he had brought to everything he had ever done in naval aviation. This is how it had started. When Zara was 4 years old, her father took her to Naval Air Station Jacksonville for an open house event. She was small enough to walk under the wings of the aircraft on display without ducking. She had walked up to an F-18 on the flight line and stood under it and looked up at it for a very long time without saying anything. Then she had turned to her father and said, "How does it know to come back down?" Her father had looked at her for a moment and then crouched beside her and began to explain lift and gravity in the simplest terms he knew, and she had listened to the whole explanation without looking away, and when he finished she had said, "What happens if it forgets?" He had told the story many times in the years afterward. It was the moment he understood that his daughter was going to need real answers, not simple ones. Because she asked real questions. She had always asked real questions. When she was 5, he built a flight simulator in the garage of their house in Jacksonville. Not a toy. He ordered the instruments piece by piece and assembled them carefully over 4 months, and when it was done it was a legitimate training environment, the kind of thing used in actual pilot preparation programs. He sat Zara in the left seat and started at the beginning. Attitude indicators. Airspeed. Altitude. Vertical speed. What each instrument was measuring and why each measurement mattered. She learned it the way she learned everything her father taught her. Completely, with questions, and without pretending to understand something she did not actually understand yet. He taught her emergency procedures from the beginning. This was the part that people who heard about it later always found most surprising. Not the basic flying, that seemed like something a smart child could learn with enough time and the right teacher. But the emergencies. Engine failures. Electrical system problems. Loss of instruments. Total hydraulic failure. Incapacitation of flight crew. He ran her through every scenario he could build into the simulator. He ran them again. He ran variations. He was not trying to frighten her. He was doing what naval aviation had taught him, which was that emergency preparedness is not optional, that you practice failure because failure in the air is real and the only answer to it is knowing in advance what you are going to do. He told her one thing so many times it became the shape of how she thought about aviation. He said, "The airplane does not care how old you are. It does not care what your name is. It only responds to correct inputs. You give it the right input, it responds correctly. You give it the wrong input, it does not. That is all flying is. Correct inputs, in the right order, at the right time." Zara had written that in the front of her first logbook when she was 7. She still had that logbook. The writing was a child's writing, slightly crooked, very careful. When she was 8, she had passed the FAA Ground School Knowledge Assessment with a score of 91%. The examiner had asked her father afterward, very quietly, if this was real, meaning had she actually answered those questions herself without coaching in the room. Her father had said yes. The examiner had looked at the score sheet for a long moment and then said he needed to make some calls. Those calls had led, over the following year, to a petition for a special educational exemption, a series of FAA evaluations, and ultimately to the issuance of a student pilot certificate for a 9-year-old that made aviation history in a quiet, undocumented way that her father had specifically requested remain undocumented until Zara was old enough to decide for herself whether she wanted the attention. She had started actual flight training at age 9 in a Cessna 172. Her father flew every session with her as required by the exemption, sitting in the right seat, hands near the controls and almost never on them. She had her first supervised solo at age 10. The moment the wheels lifted off the runway with her hands on the yoke and her father's hands nowhere near anything, she had made a sound her father described later as somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She had not known she was going to make that sound. It had come out of her before she could stop it. By the time she was 11, she had flown in 6 different aircraft types. By the time she was 12 and sitting in seat 14A of Delta Flight 2219 with her library book about ocean currents, she had more real aviation knowledge than many adults who held full private pilot certificates. None of this was visible. Zara had learned to keep it invisible not because she was ashamed of it but because she had found very early that people responded strangely when they found out. They either did not believe her, which was irritating, or they believed her and became strange about it, treating her like something unusual to look at rather than a person to talk to. She preferred the library book and the little model airplane in her pocket and the window seat where she could watch the ground fall away on takeoff and feel the aircraft's behavior in the subtle movement of the cabin around her. She could always feel what an aircraft was doing. Her father said this was called developed feel and that most pilots spent years trying to get it and some never did. At 10:41 in the morning, Zara felt something change. Not a dramatic change. Not the kind of thing that makes passengers grab their armrests. Just a small, subtle shift in the aircraft's attitude. The nose dropped a degree or two, not enough to be alarming, enough to be wrong. She felt it through the seat. She set her book down on her lap and looked out the window. The horizon had tilted slightly. She watched it. It corrected, but slowly. Too slowly, and too much, swinging back past level and then correcting again. That was not autopilot flying. Autopilot corrections were small and fast and precise. These corrections were large and uncertain, the kind of corrections that came from hands on the controls that were not sure what they were doing. Then she heard the autopilot disconnect chime from the cockpit, faint through the closed door, 3 soft tones that most passengers would not recognize and would not hear anyway over the ambient noise of the cabin. Zara heard it. She had heard that exact chime hundreds of times in the simulator and knew exactly what it meant. Someone had disconnected the autopilot and was hand flying. She sat very still and listened and watched the angle of light through the window. The aircraft swayed again. She counted. She watched. 2 minutes later, the PA system clicked on. The voice that came through was young and female, trying hard to sound calm. Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Park speaking. We are experiencing, the captain has become unwell and is receiving care. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. Everything is under control. The voice cracked on the last sentence. Just slightly. But Zara heard it. She heard what the words were not saying. She heard the too fast breathing underneath the professional language. She heard the slight tremor that comes from hands that are gripping too hard. She heard 7 months of commercial flying experience trying to carry a weight that 7 months was not quite enough for alone. She understood what was happening in the cockpit because she had been taught to understand it. Her father had made her study crew resource management, the protocols for exactly this situation. She had read the captain incapacitation checklist for a Boeing 737-800 so many times she could write it from memory. Zara reached under the seat and picked up her backpack. She put the library book inside. She touched the model F-18 in her pocket once, briefly, the way she always did when she needed to think clearly. She stood up. The man in 14B, a heavy-set man in a business suit who had been sleeping, opened one eye. Flight attendant said to stay seated, kid. Zara looked at him. I know, she said. I need to go to the cockpit. He blinked at her. She was already moving up the aisle toward the front of the plane. Rosa the flight attendant was at the cockpit door when Zara reached the front of the cabin. She was knocking with the flat of her hand and her face had lost all its professional warmth and showed something simpler and more honest underneath it. Fear. Sweetheart, you cannot be up here, she said, turning when she heard Zara behind her. You need to go back to your seat right now. There's a problem with the trim, Zara said clearly. I can hear it in how the aircraft is correcting. The first officer is fighting extra resistance and it's making everything harder. I need to tell them. Rosa stared at her. You're 12 years old. I know, Zara said. I'm also a pilot. Please open the door. Rosa did not open the door. Instead she turned back to it and knocked again, and this time it opened. What was behind it confirmed everything Zara had calculated from the sounds and the aircraft's behavior. First Officer Danny Park was in the right seat with both hands clamped on the yoke, leaning forward, breathing in shallow fast bursts. His face was pale. His eyes were moving between instruments in a rapid unfocused way that told Zara he was looking at everything and processing nothing. And in the left seat, Captain Robert Hayes, 19 years of commercial aviation experience, was slumped back in his seat with his head tilted slightly to the right, eyes closed, face the color of old paper. He was breathing. His chest was moving. But he was not conscious and he was not flying, and he had not been for at least 4 minutes. First Officer Park looked at the doorway and saw Rosa and then saw Zara behind Rosa, and his expression moved through about 4 different things in 2 seconds. "Is there a doctor on board?" he said. His voice was thin and tight. "Is there anyone who knows? I've been flying 7 months, I need someone who, please, is there a pilot back there, is there anyone?" "I'm a pilot," Zara said. Danny Park stared at the 12-year-old in the gray hoodie and the unaccompanied minor lanyard. For 1 full second he said nothing. Then he said, "I'm sorry, what?" "My name is Zara Mitchell," she said. She stepped into the doorway past Rosa, who moved aside without seeming to decide to. "I am 12 years old. I have a Federal Aviation Administration student pilot certificate under Special Exemption number 74419. My father is Commander James Mitchell, retired Navy, former F-18 pilot with 18 years fleet experience. He has been training me since I was 5. I have 650 simulator hours on this aircraft type and 809 total training hours. Right now your trim is off and you are fighting the aircraft instead of flying it, and it is exhausting you and making everything feel worse than it is. I need you to let me help you." Danny Park looked at her for another second. The aircraft shifted under them, a slow uncertain roll to the left that he caught and overcorrected back. His knuckles were white. "You're a child," he said. "I know," Zara said. "And right now I am the most useful person on this aircraft. So please." Danny made the only decision left to make when all the other decisions have run out. "Get in," he said. "Okay. Get in here." Zara moved to the center pedestal between the 2 seats. She had been in cockpits many times, in trainers and simulators, and once in the jump seat of a regional aircraft that her father had arranged as an observation flight. But this was different from all of those, and she knew it was different, and she let herself know it for 1 full second, felt the weight of what was actually happening, 148 people behind her and a man unconscious in the left seat and a young pilot shaking in the right seat and an aircraft that needed help. She felt all of that. And then she set it aside and looked at the instruments. She scanned them the way she had been trained to scan, left to right, top to bottom, the full panel in under 6 seconds. Airspeed 287 knots. Altitude 34,100 feet, trending down slightly. Pitch attitude 2 degrees nose low. Trim indicator showed the stabilizer was set slightly nose down from where it should have been, probably shifted when Captain Hayes had gone limp and his hand or his weight had caught the trim wheel. There it was. That was what Danny had been fighting. She had heard it in the aircraft's behavior from row 14. "Danny," she said. She used his first name deliberately. Her father had taught her that using a person's name brought them back to themselves. "Danny, look at the trim indicator. Right there, the green band. You see how the marker is just below center?" He looked where she was pointing, his eyes still moving too fast. "Yes," he said. "That's why it feels heavy. Captain Hayes must have shifted it when he lost consciousness. You've been flying a nose-heavy aircraft and you've been muscling it the whole time. I need you to make a very small trim adjustment toward you. Very small. Just enough to bring that marker to center. What if I do it wrong?" "You won't," she said. "It's a small movement. I'm watching. Go ahead." Danny's hand moved to the trim wheel. He made the adjustment, tentative, too small at first, and then Zara said, "A little more, just a little," and he made it a little more, and they both felt it at the same moment, the aircraft becoming suddenly easier, the pressure coming off the controls, the heavy nose-down resistance dissolving. Danny exhaled like he had been holding that breath for 4 minutes. "Oh," he said. "Oh, that's completely different." "That's the airplane," Zara said. That's what it feels like when you're not fighting it. You've been flying the hard version. Now we fly the easy version. She coached him through the next 6 minutes one step at a time. Not in theory. In specific, concrete steps, one after another, the way her father had always coached her, because panicking people cannot hold abstract ideas but they can follow exact instructions when the voice giving them is steady. Airspeed back to 280. Altitude stabilized. Heading checked against the flight plan. Danny's breathing slowed. His hands loosened on the yoke. He was a trained pilot. The training was there. He had just needed something to lean on while the training came back. "Can we get autopilot back on?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "When you're ready. Give it another minute. Let yourself settle." He nodded. He was already more settled than he had been. She could see it in the set of his shoulders. At 10:53 in the morning, the radio brought a new voice into the cockpit. Military radio, clipped and direct. Delta 2219, this is Buckley Air Defense, radar has your aircraft deviating from assigned corridor. You are approaching restricted airspace. Identify and advise. Danny looked at Zara. The color had come back to his face but his eyes were uncertain again. "That's military," he said. "We drifted during, I don't know what to tell them, what do I say?" "I'll handle it," Zara said. And she reached for the radio. She keyed the microphone. Her small hand on the switch was steady. "Buckley Air Defense, this is Delta 2219 declaring emergency. Captain incapacitated at cruise altitude. First officer is flying with qualified assistance. We are requesting priority vectors to Denver International and immediate coordination for medical teams on ground. Captain Hayes has suffered an apparent cardiac event and is unconscious but breathing." There was a pause on the frequency. A short one. Then, Delta 2219, Buckley copies emergency. Confirm captain incapacitated and nature of assistance. Who is transmitting? Zara did not hesitate. Buckley, transmitting is Zara Mitchell, student pilot, FAA Special Exemption Certificate number 74419, daughter of Commander James Mitchell, retired Navy, Carrier Air Wing 8. I have 650 simulator hours on Boeing 737 type and 800 total training hours. I am 12 years old and I am currently assisting First Officer Park in managing this emergency. We need vectors to Denver and we need them soon. The frequency was silent for 5 full seconds. And then something happened in the left seat that nobody in that cockpit expected. Captain Robert Hayes, who had been completely unresponsive for 11 minutes, who had not moved when Rosa spoke to him or when Danny had said his name twice or when the aircraft lurched during the worst of the turbulent corrections, moved. His head turned. Slowly, with great difficulty, but it turned. Toward the radio. Toward the voice. His eyes opened. Not fully. Just enough. Heavy and unfocused, like a man fighting to the surface of something very deep. But they were open and they were oriented toward the center console, toward the radio, toward the source of the voice. Rosa was kneeling beside him monitoring his pulse and she felt the change immediately, felt his arm shift, felt the slow return of muscle tension that meant something was coming back inside him. "Captain Hayes," she said softly. "Captain, can you hear me?" He did not look at her. He was looking at the radio. He was listening. The voice on the radio had done something that nothing else had done in 11 minutes. It had pulled him partway back. Because that voice was doing something that voices in cockpits do. It was calm. It was specific. It knew what it was talking about. And somewhere deep inside the fog of what was happening to him, some part of Robert Hayes that had spent 19 years flying recognized that voice for what it was. His mouth moved. The words came out slow and very quiet but they came. "Who?" he said. He stopped. Tried again. "Who is that? Who is talking to Buckley?" Rosa looked at Zara. Zara looked at Captain Hayes. His eyes found hers across the cockpit. "My name is Zara Mitchell," she said, clearly and gently, the way her father had taught her to speak to someone who needed simple and true things. "I am 12 years old. I am a pilot. I am helping First Officer Park manage the aircraft. You are going to be okay, Captain Hayes. We are going to Denver and there are doctors waiting on the ground." He looked at her for a long moment. The radio beside her was still active, Buckley coming back now with vectors and coordination and the news that 2 F-18s from the base were being scrambled to escort the aircraft in. And this child, this 12-year-old girl with a library book in her backpack and a model airplane in her pocket, was answering them. Acknowledging the call signs. Confirming the vectors. Speaking the language of the sky with a fluency that did not belong to someone her age, and yet was completely, undeniably real. Captain Hayes closed his eyes again. But before they closed, his lips moved. Rosa leaned close to hear. He said 2 words. Not to her. To the cockpit. To the voice. "Good inputs," he said. And then he was still again, but differently still than before, not lost, just resting, trusting the voice that was bringing his aircraft home. The Buckley controller came back on frequency. A different voice now, older, with the particular weight that command puts in a voice over years. "Delta 2219, this is Colonel Sandra Reyes, Buckley Air Defense Commander. I have 2 F-18 Super Hornets from the 461st joining your position for escort. They will be on your left and right wing in approximately 3 minutes. Maintain current heading. You are cleared direct Denver International with priority handling." A pause. Then, "Zara Mitchell, your father called this office 40 seconds ago. He is already driving to Denver. He says to tell you he is proud of you and to keep your scan going." Something moved across Zara's face that she could not entirely control. Something that was 12 years old and had been holding very steady for a very long time and was now being told that her father knew and was coming. She pressed her lips together and nodded once at the radio even though Colonel Reyes could not see her nodding. Then she keyed the mic, "Copy that, Colonel. Please tell him I remembered everything he taught me." "He heard you himself," Colonel Reyes said. "He's on the line. He's been listening for the last 4 minutes." Zara did not let herself think about that. She could think about it later. Right now the aircraft needed her attention. Through the cockpit windows, 2 shapes appeared below and to either side, climbing fast and precise and settling into position on the wings, 50 feet off each wingtip. 2 F-18 Super Hornets, gray against the blue Colorado sky, steady and close, watching. The aircraft her father had flown for 18 years. The aircraft that was in some way present in every important memory of her childhood, in the photographs on his walls and the stories he told and the model she carried in her pocket every day. They were right there outside the glass. She looked at the left one for a moment and something in her chest did something she could not name, something that felt like not being alone, like the world her father lived in had come to find her. "F-18 flight, Delta 2219, she said on the frequency. "We have you visual. Thank you for the company." The left aircraft rocked its wings once, gently. That was all. But she understood it. She turned back to Danny. "Okay," she said. "Descent checklist. We're 40 minutes from Denver. Let's set up for arrival." Danny straightened in his seat. His face was focused now. The professional coming back through the fear the way it was supposed to. "Okay," he said. "Walk me through it." "Together," she said. "You know this. I'm here." The approach into Denver International was, in Danny Park's words when he had enough distance to find words for it, the most precise and the most surreal 30 minutes of his aviation career. Zara stood at the center pedestal and coached him through every phase in the same calm specific voice she had been using since she walked into the cockpit. She did not touch the controls. She did not need to. She guided him with numbers and sequences and the steady presence of someone who knew what was supposed to happen next and could tell him, one step at a time, so he did not have to hold the whole arrival in his head at once. He was capable. He had always been capable. He had just needed someone to stand beside him while the shaking stopped. At 800 feet, with the runway at Denver clear ahead of them and the F-18 escort peeling away with a climbing turn to each side, Danny said quietly, without taking his eyes off the instruments, "How are you so calm?" Zara thought about that for a moment. "My dad says panic is a choice," she said. "He says you practice being calm the same way you practice anything else. You practice it in the simulator before the situation is real so that when it is real, the calm is already built in." Danny nodded. The runway threshold was coming up. He had the glide slope. He had the airspeed. He had everything he needed. "Okay," he said, almost to himself. "Okay. I've got it." He did have it. He flared the aircraft at 50 feet with hands that were steady and sure. He brought the power back. He held the nose up with a touch that was controlled and correct. The main gear of Delta Flight 2219 touched the runway at Denver International Airport with a smooth double chirp of rubber on pavement, solid and clean. The nose came down. The thrust reversers deployed with their deep mechanical roar. The aircraft slowed down the runway with emergency vehicles on both sides, fire trucks and ambulances and flashing lights all the way to the end. And Danny Park exhaled for what felt like the first time in 40 minutes and put his hand over his face for a moment and did not say anything. Then he looked at Zara. "That was mine," he said. "That landing was mine." "Yes," she said. "You did that." Captain Hayes was moved to a waiting ambulance within 5 minutes. The paramedics confirmed a serious cardiac arrhythmia. He was taken to the University of Colorado Hospital where cardiologists stabilized him. He would spend 11 days in the hospital and he would fly again, because he was the kind of person who flew again, and the first thing he asked when he was clear-headed enough to ask it was what had happened on his aircraft and who the voice on the radio had been. The 148 passengers of Delta Flight 2219 came off the aircraft in varying states of shock and relief and confusion. Most of them did not know exactly what had happened. They knew the captain had been ill. They knew there had been some kind of emergency. What they did not know, because they had no way of knowing, was that a 12-year-old girl in a gray hoodie had walked to the front of the aircraft and talked 2 F-18 fighter jets through an escort approach and helped a first officer land a Boeing 737 on a Denver runway while the emergency lights flashed on the ground below. Zara was on the tarmac with her backpack on her shoulders when the 2 FAA investigators arrived. One of them, Agent Carol Vance, was a woman who had spent 22 years investigating aviation incidents and who had genuinely thought she had encountered every unusual thing aviation could produce. She had not encountered this. She looked at Zara for a long moment. At the yellow unaccompanied minor lanyard. At the gray hoodie. At the small model F/A-18 that Zara had taken out of her pocket and was holding in both hands. "You want to tell me what happened up there?" Agent Vance said. "I helped First Officer Park," Zara said. "That's all." "You coordinated with military air defense on emergency radio," Vance said. "You identified and corrected a trim problem at cruise altitude. You coached a commercial pilot through a full arrival sequence." She paused. "At 12 years old. My father trained me," Zara said. "He trained me well." Commander James Mitchell arrived at Denver International Airport 37 minutes later. He had driven from his apartment near the base at a speed his truck was not really supposed to go. He was 50 years old and lean and gray at his temples, and he had a way of moving through airport terminals that came from years of moving through spaces that required decisiveness. He was not running. But he was not walking slowly either. He came through the doors and saw her standing by a window in the afternoon light, backpack on her back, the little F/A-18 in her hand. She ran to him. Not the composed, careful version of herself that had stood at the center pedestal of a Boeing 737 for 40 minutes and talked to fighter jets and coached a first officer through one of the worst experiences of his career. The 12-year-old version. She ran all the way and he lifted her off the ground with both arms and held her, feeling how small she was and how completely unacceptable it would have been for anything to happen to her and how glad he was that she was here and in one piece and that he could hold her. "Dad." Her voice was muffled against his shoulder. "I know," he said. "Colonel Reyes called me. I was on the radio for most of it." He set her down and looked at her. The way he always looked at her when the truth mattered. Directly, fully, without softening it. "You did everything right. The trim identification. The crew resource management. The radio procedures. The way you brought Park back to his training. Everything." He paused. "I heard you tell them you remembered everything I taught you." "I said that for you," she said. "I know. It worked." She almost smiled. "Were you scared?" He said. She looked at him carefully. "The whole time," she said. "Good," he said. "That is exactly correct." First Officer Danny Park found them 10 minutes later. He had changed out of his uniform jacket and he looked like a man who had been very frightened and was now something on the other side of it. He stopped a few feet away and looked at Commander Mitchell. "Sir," he said. Mitchell looked at him. "You landed that aircraft," Mitchell said. "First Officer. Under conditions that would have broken a lot of people. You held it together." "Your daughter held me together," Danny said. "She walked into a cockpit where I was losing it completely and she gave me back my own training. I don't know how to explain what she did. I don't have the words for it." He looked at Zara. "I'm going to be better after this. I'm going to train harder. I'm going to be someone who deserves what she believed about me up there." Zara looked at him steadily. "You already were," she said. "You just couldn't see it. That's what I was there for." The story came out 3 months later when the FAA released its incident report. 12 pages of measured regulatory language describing an unprecedented event. The coverage was immediate and enormous. The way coverage of certain things is enormous because they speak to something universal, something about human capability emerging from the most unexpected possible source. Zara gave one interview. Her father negotiated the terms. One interview, one serious journalist, and then quiet. She sat across from the interviewer in clothes that were neat but not formal, the little F-18 on the table beside her because she had brought it out of her pocket and set it there when she sat down without thinking about it, and she answered every question the way her father had taught her to answer questions. Truthfully, without drama, with a clear sense of what actually mattered. When they asked what was going through her mind when the captain collapsed and she understood what was happening, she said she was thinking about the trim and what it was doing to the first officer and what needed to happen first. When they asked if she had been afraid, she said yes, the whole time, and that being afraid was correct because the situation was serious and being afraid meant she understood that. When they asked if she thought of herself as a hero, she picked up the model F-18 from the table and turned it over in her hands for a moment. "Danny Park made that landing," she said. "I just stood next to him while he remembered he could." When they asked about the little model airplane, she smiled for the first time in the interview, a real one. "My dad gave me this when I was 9, she said. "It goes everywhere with me. I was holding it when I walked to the cockpit." She looked at it. "I think it helped." Zara Mitchell continued doing what Zara Mitchell did. She flew. She trained. She studied. At 15 she passed her private pilot written examination with a score of 96. At 16 she earned her full private pilot certificate, not a special exemption, the real certificate, because she had done everything required and more. At 18 she entered the United States Naval Academy. She was quiet in the first weeks, observant, taking measure of the institution with the same careful attention she gave to everything new. She excelled. At 23 she earned her Navy Wings of Gold at Naval Air Station Pensacola, and her father pinned them on with hands that were steadier than the last time he had held her but not entirely steady, and everyone who knew them understood why. She trained on the T-45 and then the F-18. When she flew the F-18 for the first time it was exactly what she had expected. Not identical to the simulator. Nothing was identical to the simulator. But deeply familiar. Like something she had been building toward since before she had the words for what she was building toward. She kept the little model F-18 in her locker on the carrier. Behind her flight gear. Gray and worn smooth from years of being held. Her squadron mates knew about it. When new pilots asked, she told them about a Thursday in March, a flight from Atlanta to Denver, a first officer who needed to remember what he knew, and a 12-year-old girl who walked to the front of an airplane and decided that what she had was enough. And when they asked what she had learned from it, she always said the same thing her father had told her and his wing commanders had told him and the generations before them had understood in the way that people who do hard things come to understand it. The airplane does not care how old you are, she said. It only responds to correct inputs. Give it the right input and it responds correctly. That is all flying is. She paused. And when the moment comes, you use what you have. She looked at the little gray model in her hand. What I had that morning was everything my father had ever taught me. And it turned out that was exactly enough.